A mother's love is supposed to be a shield, the one unconditional promise of safety a child has against the world. But for 3-year-old Dawson Zamoria, that promise wasn't just broken, it was shattered in the most horrific way you can imagine. For him, home wasn't a safe place, and the one person who should have been his fierce protector, his own mother, made a fatal choice. In a betrayal that had shaken a Texas community, Chelsea Berg chose her boyfriend over her son, and in doing so, she condemned him. This is a story of that choice and the devastating consequences that followed. Dawson Zamoria was a bright, happy 3-year-old. Photos show a little boy with a huge, infectious smile. He was the center of his father's world. His parents, Chelsea Berg and Darian Zamoria, were separated. Darian lived in another city, Amarillo, Texas. But despite the distance, he was a deeply involved and loving father. Chelsea, who was 30 years old, was living in McKinney, Texas. She had started a new life with a new boyfriend, 30-year-old Christopher Alexandria. From the outside, it might have looked like they were building a new family, but inside their home, something dark was festering. Christopher Alexandria wasn't just a new boyfriend. He was already on law enforcement's radar. In fact, he was wearing an ankle monitor for stalking accusations in a completely separate case. And soon he would turn his violent attention to the most vulnerable person in the house, little Dawson. The first red flags didn't go unnoticed. Dawson's father, Darian, started seeing bruises on his son during their visit. He was getting more and more concerned, questioning what was happening in Chelsea's home when he wasn't around. But his worries were just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. The full, chilling truth was hiding in plain sight. In the text messages between Chelsea Berg and her boyfriend, and these messages don't paint the picture of a mother who was clueless. They show a mother who knew exactly what was happening and did nothing to stop it. More than a month before Dawson's final trip to the hospital, Chelsea was already texting Christopher about her son's injuries. On September 8th, she wrote, "He clearly hit his head when he fell. He was a bruise on his eyebrow, and his whole jawline and cheek is bruised." She knew. 10 days later, her text became a direct accusation. She wrote to Alexandria, 100,000% serious. "You bruise him, hurt him, and cause damage every single time you are alone with him. There hasn't been a single time you've been alone with him where he hasn't been hurt." In another message, she called him quite literally a threat to my son. Just think about that. She wrote those words. She knew her boyfriend was a threat, but she kept leaving her 3-year-old son alone with him. Why? According to the arrest affidavit, both Berg and Alexander avoided getting Dawson medical care because they were afraid of getting Child Protective Services or CPS involved. It seems the fear of an investigation was more important to them than Dawson's life. The abuse didn't stop, and Darian grew more and more desperate, fighting to get his son to safety. But on October 14th of 2025, everything came to a head. That morning, Chelsea Berg went to work, once again, leaving Dawson alone with Christopher Alexander. Just after lunch, she got a frantic call. It was Alexander. He was panicked, he said, and he was rushing Dawson to the hospital. Christopher Alexander arrived at Medical City McKinney carrying a limp, unresponsive 3-year-old. He told the hospital staff that he'd been in another room and just heard a thud, but the medical team knew right away that was a lie. Dawson's injuries were catastrophic. They told a story of brutal, sustained cruelty, not a simple fall. He had severe brain trauma and bleeding in his brain. His tiny body was a roadmap of abuse, covered in bruises in various stages of healing. He also had open wounds on his chest, stomach, and rear. The hospital staff did exactly what they were supposed to. They called the police. When detectives showed up, Alexander gave his flimsy story, then immediately lawyered up and refused to say another word. When Chelsea Berg got to the hospital, police showed her photos of her son's injuries. She insisted he didn't have those injuries when she left for work that morning. But her own phone was about to tell a very different story. Police got a warrant for both of their phones, and that's when they found the text messages. On October 16th, both Christopher Alexander and Chelsea Berg was arrested. Alexander was charged with injury to a child and tampering with evidence because investigators found signs that he tried to clean up the crime scene. Chelsea Berg was charged with injury to a child by omission, a charge confirming she didn't throw the punches, but she knowingly failed to protect her son from the man who did. Alexander stayed in jail, but Berg was released on bond. For the next 2 months, Dawson Zamora clung to life. He was transferred to Medical City, Dallas, where he lay on life support. His father, Darian, never left his side, and he was documented his son's heartbreaking decline. In a public post, he described the horrific reality of Dawson's condition. He has opened his eyes, but he does not track movement, does not smile, does not cry, does not make a noise. His body was stiffened up. His body has stiffened up. His wrists curl into his chest, and his feet point straight with no bend at the ankle at all. My son Dawson is not Dawson anymore. Darian describes his son as being in a persistent vegetative state with global brain damage. During this time, Darian had to go to court to stop Chelsea from seeing Dawson without supervision, ultimately gaining sole custody and the power to make medical decisions for his son. Then on December 7th of 2025, after a 54-day fight for his life, 3-year-old Dawson Zamoria passed away. In a final heartbreaking twist, his life ended on his father's birthday. In a social media post overflowing with a father's grief, Darian Zamoria wrote, "My son Dawson has passed away. His gift to me was his final breath, and we are now forever interlocked with my birth and his death. He held on to spend one last birthday with me and refused to go until then." Following Dawson's death, the charges against his mother and her boyfriend were immediately upgraded. Christopher Alexander's charge was elevated to capital murder of a person under 10 years old. And Chelsea Berg, the mother who chose her boyfriend over her son, was rearrested on December 8th and also charged with capital murder. Prosecutors alleged she knew the danger, saw the bruises, and even wrote down the threat in her own words. And still she chose to do nothing. Her failure to act, her omission, was a fatal link in the chain of events that led to her son's death. Dawson Zamoria summed up the devastating truth of it all. "My son didn't have to die," he wrote. "This could have been prevented. He should have been protected, and now he was murdered. My 3-year-old murdered, and I'm left carrying this, and I don't know where to go from here." Both Chelsea Berg and Christopher Alexander are now in the Collin County Jail, facing the most serious charge possible in Texas. Dawson Zamoria's short life was ended by unimaginable violence, and by the one person who should have moved mountains to keep him safe. His story is a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't strangers, the ones we let through the front door. Thank you for listening to this case. The details are incredibly difficult, but it's so important that we remember victims like Dawson. If you'd like to see more content that brings awareness to these stories, please consider subscribing, and as always, stay safe and look out for the most vulnerable among us.